Welcome to GP Devs virtual meetup. This one is about testing. Just a quick little overview of software testing, why we do it, what it is, and hopefully we can have a discussion after. Let me see. Here we go. Just going to share my screen. Move this. There we go. Yeah. So testing. 1, 2, 3. So there's a few different types of tests, obviously. We have automated testing, and then there's manual testing. And this presentation is mainly about automated testing. Manual testing is somebody physically going and testing the app. You have like a QA team, or yourself. You would QA your work, make sure all like the happy paths are okay, so everything that's supposed to happen. Test edge cases, test bad data, that kind of thing. But that gets really tedious, especially if you have a really big app with lots of different paths to take. It could almost become like a whole day's work just to test your feature, especially if you're regression testing. Like you add a new feature and you want to make sure everything else is compatible and still works. So you test everything again and it just takes a really long time. So we use automated testing to try and remove that necessity of having a human being try and test your website or your app. So we're going to go through a few different types of testing that are automated. The first one being unit tests. And these are kind of like your most basic test at a very low level. And usually you would test like your function. So let's say you have a function that adds some numbers together. So you would test to make sure that, 1 + 2 is actually 3 and not 12, that kind of thing. You could test a variety of different inputs, like try letters, try passing functions to it and see what happens. And this is just so that you know that function does what it's supposed to do, and just that. And usually these are really cheap to write because you're just testing your one function you wrote. And so usually people love to write these and not so much the bigger tests because these ones are much easier to write. The next section we have are integration tests. So these verify that pieces of your code work together, hence the word integration. But like an example, if you have, let's say, like a user sign up service that would then use an email service to fire off an email when the user signs up, you'd make sure that those work together. You'd probably fake the email so it doesn't send off to a random account each time, but you would have to make sure those two work together, because when your user signs up, you want to be able to have them get a welcome email or something like that. So that's just verifying that 2 or more different services work together as they're supposed to. So these are one step up from unit tests, a little bit more involved, a little bit more to write and to keep in mind, but at the same time, a little more useful. It's closer to what your app actually behaves like. Then we have functional tests, which are more so for testing your business logic. So mainly you'll see these more so in the back end, which is where your business logic should reside. But you can also have business logic in your front end, and you can have these as in your front end as well. These are more so for verifying the output of an action. So when I sign up for my user login service, I should actually have a user in the database. I should have my email sent, and I should have, if you have any like specific things, like let's say special password requirements, or when you create an email, maybe they're associated with an account type that's specific to your, like an admin or a cashier or something. Make sure that their account type is correct and follows the logic that was set out in your requirements. And so these tests don't really care how you did it. They just care what you did is working as we want it to. So they're a little more abstract than unit tests, but they're closer towards the previous test, the integration tests. The next set are pretty much the biggest test suites, end to end. So head to toe, basically you're replicating what a user would do. So if my website is to order a pizza, I would have the test suite add a pizza to my cart, maybe customize it, add pineapple on my pizza because that's the correct way to eat pizza, and check out, put my credit card details in, and make sure I get my email confirmation, let's say. That's basically what a end-to-end test would be doing, is replicating your app's functionality. And so these are obviously super useful because you have what a user is doing. But as you can imagine, they are quite expensive to perform because they take a long time to write and they take time to run. And they're very tough to maintain, especially in a bigger code base. Like if you add a new feature that maybe you add, let's say you add, when you add your pizza to cart, maybe your new feature would redirect the user to have like a little spot saying, oh, maybe add a pop or add some wings to your order, but your test doesn't add that and forgot about it, then the test is out of date and doesn't actually do what the user is doing. Especially if you're doing things like branching or A/B testing, where maybe only half the users get to see that. That just adds more tests right there, more time to write. And of course, when you inevitably remove that feature, you're gonna have to either remove that test or comment it out or something. So they are tough to maintain. Usually your unit tests probably wouldn't change ever. They probably shouldn't, unless you're really changing the function's purpose, or maybe fixing a bug or something. So those ones are kind of right ones, and just keep, but end-to-end tests usually tend to evolve more. They're more of an alive test than a unit test would be. And that's why they're a lot tougher to maintain, because now you're maintaining two pieces of the code instead of just the one. And of course, no one wants to do that. So these ones kind of fall back, but they are super useful. And if you get a good test suite set up, you have a lot more confidence in shipping something, especially if you have a really big app with a lot of different like branching areas, different things they can do. And like we said in the beginning, it takes a long time to manually test something. So this is a great way to replace that. And a lot of front end code bases use snapshot tests, or also called visual testing. And so this is pretty useful if you have like a component based app or website that, let's say you have a few different components that do like a button that lives in a bunch of different areas, and you change the submit button on the form to have a bigger font or something, and yeah, it looks great in the form, but you don't realize that the header button for logging in is now way out of whack because it's too big. But you didn't realize this because you tested on mobile only, so you shipped it, and now you've broken your website for a lot of users trying to log in. But with snapshot testing, if you had taken a snapshot of that button before you changed it, and you have it set up to catch everywhere that button is, you would then see a diff of previous button and the new button bigger, and you'd see that it broke in the header. Like you'd visually see it with a UI. So these are really handy, especially in like front end code bases. So you can see if your change has affected more than just what you thought. It's really easy to change something and not realize where it has been affected, especially if you're writing something like in JavaScript that, it isn't compiled, so it's hard to catch those things at compile time. But these are also, they're tedious to set up, and most of the services for visual testing are paid, so they're a little expensive, but if you're in a big team, it's probably okay. But there's a really cool service. I think what's it called? Screener is a company, I think, Sauce Labs. But basically, it integrates a storybook for JavaScript, and you can actually just write your story and then add your story to the config file, and it'll automatically create all the snapshots for you. So that's really nice because you're not doing it twice in your story and then also in a test. So there are some tools that are trying to make our lives a little bit easier. And at the end of this, we'll chat about different tooling. And a lot of it can integrate with your pipeline, like your build pipeline. Like if you use like a Git-based workflow, you probably want every time you push a commit for your pipeline to build something so you can see it and share the URL with your teammates or with your customers. And the best way to catch something is automatically. And we're all human. We could forget to run our tests or just not do it. But if it's in our pipeline and automatically does it, then you're not going to forget and you're not going to push anything, because if you push something that breaks your test, you can't merge. So that's the nice thing about automating all these tests in your pipelines. So just on the right, just an example of like a CI output of some tests. So if you push up some code and it's broken something in a different test, it would automatically catch it and it would tell you, oh, you broke something in your header. You better go fix it if you want your code to be merged. And there's tons of free options. There's tons of paid options. GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, everything integrates somehow with something to run your tests for you. Website CI is quite a bit easier than app CI, in my opinion. But it's always getting better. And chances are, if you're on a bigger team, there's probably a team dedicated to your DevOps setup that will do that for you. But if you're doing your own code, it's kind of nice to do this, to do the whole write your website, write your tests, set up your pipeline. It's kind of a cool exercise in seeing how it all integrates together. Good learning experience. There's many different types of test suites, like test tools. Like there's like all like the front end ones like Cypress or Jest, React testing library. There's back end ones for Express. There's back end ones for like PHP. There's what's the Java one? I can't remember what it's called. It's super popular. Pretty much only use the one. But most, and I wish Philip was here because he'd tell me if Rust has it built in or not. I don't know if it is or not. But most languages have it, a separate tool. But I think even Dart has a built-in one now. The newer language I imagine would, because they're trying to make your life easier as a developer. And tests are usually one of the best ways to do that. But there's definitely, like, you have many options most of the time, and many options for automating it too, which is also really helpful. And that's the end of the presentation I prepared. We can definitely chat if you have any questions, concerns, or comments about testing. Obviously, why we do it is to make our lives easier to catch things, make customers' lives better, make your code base quality better. The tests themselves are usually, you should keep the same code quality in your tests as you do in your code. But usually tests are pretty simple to write, especially like unit tests are usually pretty simple. And the nice thing, if you get a bug report and there's steps to reproduce it, well, there's your steps for your next test to just fix it and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But, does anyone have any questions about the presentation or testing in general?
Have you used Jest with JavaScript a lot?
Yeah, that's the main one I've used. My experience is mainly with Jest and then Cypress. But yeah, I use Jest for the most I use it was on a React Native app for testing kind of my business logic, and then I did some Snapshot testing with it.
Oh, okay.
It's because Jest is written by Facebook as well. It's a pretty well-maintained tool, and the docs are pretty good. But a lot of React developers are planning to migrate towards React testing library because there's I think there's less setup and it's just easier to write with. But I personally haven't used it yet. But it's on my list of next time I set up a project, I'll probably use that instead.
Okay, that's fair.
Stop sharing. yeah, Jest is nice. It's and then there is a PHP one called Pest that I think was named because of Jest, but